When the dawn broke over Roanoke, Virginia on May 29, 1950, a new citizen of that city first saw the light of day. The journeyman locomotive builders at Roanoke outshopped N&W Class J 484 number 611 on that day. Thus began an illustrious career as the ultimate example of the high horsepower steam locomotive. For 8 beautiful years, the 611 was one of an elite group of locomotives that handled all of the N&W's crack passenger trains. But even she could not stand alone against the new technology of the diesel, and she was retired in October of 1959. The late 50s were sad years for steam fans. The nation's railroads were in the last stages of dieselization, and the beloved old steam locomotives were only so many tons of scrap metal on the balance sheet. With the scrapper's torch obliterating so many steam locomotives during this time, how was it possible that the 611 survived? Part of the answer lies in the memory of a man whose name has become synonymous with the last years of steam on the N&W, Mr. O. Winston Link. Mr. Link, shown here on the left, spent years along N&W rails with his cameras, lighting equipment, and sound recorder, documenting for all time the last stand of mainline steam on the N&W. In a series of stunning night-action photographs, he has captured the true essence of what steam railroading was for so many people. The sharing of the moment between a father and son as a huge locomotive burst forth from a darkened tunnel. The stark drama of a busy locomotive facility after dark. The everyday scenes taken for granted during the carefree days of summer. And the faces of the railroaders themselves all went before Mr. Link's camera to document this unique period of American history. A consummate professional, Mr. Link has taken photographs of hundreds of steam locomotives, but he distinctly remembers the 611.
I was down in the Roanoke yards, and 611 and 1214 were out there ready to go to the scrap yard. So I tried to put a stop to that by calling Hobart Scott, who was superintendent of transportation, and I asked him to stop the movement and don't let those engines out of the yard under any condition, which he did. 611 had not been sold, so I called the purchasing agent there, purchasing man in charge of purchasing. His name was Bishop. And he said, "Either what do you want with it?" I said, "Well, I don't want it." I said, I can't manage that thing. I said, "But I want to put in a first refusal on it, and if you'll hold it and give me a chance to get the money together for it." So he said, "What do you want with it?" I said, "Well, I don't want it." I said, "I just don't want you to scrap it and send it out." I said, "Well, you should keep it and hold on to it and run it from time to time." Then what they did, I don't know. What I think they did, I think they hid the engine out in Schaefer's Crossing, kept out there in the roundhouse where nobody wouldn't attract anybody's attention. Then if anybody did ask, they say, "Well, Link wants to buy it and he's got a hold on it." And that way I think that's what happened after my conversation with Mr. Bishop. Then it went into the museum, and then we were very fortunate in waiting for years for Mr. Claytor to come along, because he feels he loves steam engines, just like his brother Graham Claytor, and just like a lot of the rest of us do. We were very fortunate in having him. Now I got to bug him about the A.
In 1981, Robert B. Claytor, N&W President and Chief Executive Officer, announced plans to bring the 611 out of retirement to participate in Roanoke's 1982 centennial celebration. Mr. Claytor said that this action was one of the most pleasant tasks he has ever had to perform. And when he told us why he wanted to revive the 611, he said, and we quote, "This is a salute to our history and to the dedicated N&W employees who made Roanoke synonymous with the world's finest steam locomotives." And so on Labor Day, 1982, Norfolk and Western Class J locomotive number 611 once again put her 80,000 pounds of tractive effort to work as she departed her hometown of Roanoke eastbound to Norfolk, Virginia. $5,100 drawbar horsepower were at work lifting the train up and over the Blue Ridge as the 611 blasted up grade in the early morning sunlight. The deep cut through the heart of Bedford, Virginia, reverberated with the unmistakable sound of a steam locomotive getting underway. A service stop was scheduled in Crewe, Virginia, a division point along the N&W Main to Norfolk. Crowds of people at line side were happy to see this old friend from the past as she eased her way into the west end of the yard. The Crewe Volunteer Fire Department was on hand for the watering chore, and the engine crew had a couple of minor repairs to make to the engine. The midday light was perfect for pictures, and scores of photographers were making the best of it. But soon the crew is ready to continue east with a full head of steam. With a route number like this, there had to be a good shot here. The 611 was given a hero's welcome upon her arrival in Norfolk. The Lambert's Point yard was choked with people who had come out to see the J. Every television station in Norfolk was here to do a story on the locomotive. A couple of the stations even originated a live broadcast from the yard as the feature news story of the day. International events took a back seat to the news in Norfolk because the 611 was in town. The next day, the 611 was scheduled to handle the passenger train back to Roanoke, but there was a problem back in Norfolk that stubbornly refused a solution. The engine crew found out, much to their chagrin, that they could not turn the 611 in Norfolk. In the years since the retirement of steam, some changes had been made to the track layout at Lambert's Point. Many of those changes involved the loop track and the turntable approach tracks. To save some space in the yard, a few switches had been made smaller and the radius of some of the curves had been made sharper. These changes caused no problems with the diesels, but the 611's running gear is designed in such a way that the leading and trailing trucks have very powerful centering springs. So powerful that the engine simply could not negotiate the loop track or the turntable leads. She went on the ground twice during the night as the crew tried to turn her. To avoid any possible damage to the locomotive, the decision was made to dispatch the passenger train westbound with diesels on the point, and the 611 was towed backwards to Roanoke. But even with the diesels, the train made a pretty sight on the curve at Nottoway, Virginia. Once the N&W got everything sorted out, things returned to normal. Today's schedule called for the 611 to run from Roanoke to Lynchburg on the N&W, and from there to Alexandria, Virginia on the Southern. Crossing the James River Bridge north of Lynchburg, the 611 started her northbound run on Southern rails. These trips marked the beginning of scores of excursion runs for the 611. Since the N&W Southern merger, she could travel to almost any city east of the Mississippi and stay on Norfolk Southern property. She ran exclusively in the east in 1982, but in July of 1983, the west end of the system was to have its turn. In order to get there, she would have to travel all the way from Richmond, Virginia to Chicago, Illinois, on former Seaboard Airline, Atlantic Coastline, N&W, and nickel plate tracks. Crossing the James River Viaduct, she left Richmond in style, headed south towards home rails at Petersburg, Virginia. At Petersburg, an eastbound freight cleared just in time to see the 611 headed west and working hard. A small crowd had gathered in Roanoke to watch the train's arrival. West of Roanoke is where the power and muscle of the 611 will be put to good use. The N&W Maine cuts through some extremely rugged territory in West Virginia on the Pocahontas Division. Grades, bridges, and tunnels are the rule, and the many curves make for a maximum speed limit on the entire division of only 40 miles per hour. The train was scheduled to continue west to Bluefield, arriving there late in the evening. The 611 arrived in Bluefield well after 10 p.m. Even under the stark glare of the artificial lights, the train made a pretty sight as the 611 walked into the station stop. The N&W Maine west of Bluefield proved to be busy the next morning as we waited at Cooper's Tunnel in Bramwell, West Virginia. This freight, with helpers riding downhill into Bluefield, cleared up just in time for the 611's arrival on the far track. The 611 had to stop on the other side of the tunnel and is accelerating as she works hard on this 1.7% grade. Today, she's headed for Portsmouth, Ohio. Beginning the third day of this long trip, the 611 simmered quietly in the yard at Portsmouth, Ohio. In the Ohio River Valley, a morning fog is commonplace during the summer, but it usually burns off by 10 a.m., leaving a sunny summer day behind. Some of the men responsible for handling the 611 gathered near the engine to chat, while other crew members went about the task of preparing the locomotive for her run. The fog was already beginning to lift by the time the 611 crossed Johnson's Bridge on the way north. Rolling onto the Ohio State Fairgrounds in Columbus, the 611 was still in familiar territory. She had been assigned to handle the Powhatan Arrow into Columbus many times, but from Columbus north she would be traveling a new road, one she had never traveled before. The former P Company main line between Columbus and Sandusky has been purchased by the N&W, extending their original main line from Columbus north through Bellevue and on to the lakeport of Sandusky. This was always a heavy-duty main, handling lots of ore traffic from the lake boats. The route is now an important mainline link for the N&W, and the roadbed is kept in good shape. The 611 will have an opportunity to stretch her legs a bit on this route, because north of Columbus lies fairly flat country, where curves are few and far between, and grades are virtually non-existent.
Time you get stopped, Mike, will be fine from now on. Over.
We are stopping. Thank you now.
Marion, Ohio used to be the train watchers' capital of the world. The north-south mains of the P Company and the C&O crossed the east-west main line of the Erie-Lackawanna here at AC Tower. All of these tracks were busy freight routes, and it used to be commonplace to see a train through here every 10 minutes or so. There's still a lot of activity in Marion, but things just aren't what they used to be. Under Conrail, the Erie main is not needed here, since the parallel Pennsylvania main lies but a few miles north. Consequently, the old Erie's no longer used at all. The N&W runs a lot of traffic on the former Pennsylvania, and the C&O keeps their rails busy, but the economic decline of recent years has affected regular train watching in Marion quite a bit. Today, however, Marion, Ohio can once again lay claim to the title of train watchers' capital of the world, thanks to the 611. Arriving at the South Y in Bellevue, Ohio, the 611 and her train headed into the yard for servicing and fuel. A big steam locomotive in Bellevue is a fairly common occurrence because Nickel Plate Burke number 765 is headquartered here. After running a north-south route covering virtually the entire length of Ohio, Bellevue marked the point where she would turn west. The westerly route was again new territory for the 611, the former Nickel Plate Road main line to Fort Wayne. She would also see a different type of geography on this route. West of Bellevue, the featureless flatlands of western Ohio and eastern Indiana dominate the scene. N&W President and Chief Executive Officer Robert B. Claytor was at the throttle as the 611 started west out of Bellevue. Ahead of her was a 60-mile-per-hour railroad, the fastest stretch of rail she had yet encountered. As soon as she cleared all the grade crossings, Mr. Claytor worked the throttle open a bit more, and the 611 began to accelerate. From Arcadia, Ohio to Fort Wayne, Indiana, the Nickel Plate main line is as straight as a die for 80 miles, an 80-mile tangent on some of the best railroad in the state. Roaring through Macomb, Ohio at about 60 miles per hour, we sensed that the 611 was just getting warmed up. At Leipzig, Ohio, she had to slow for a speed restriction because the Nickel Plate main crosses the B&O and the DT&I at grade. A passenger stop was scheduled in Continental. When it was time to go, Mr. Claytor worked the engine hard to accelerate out of town. Ahead, 40 miles of clear track and green signals all the way to Fort Wayne. west of Payne, Ohio, we found the 611 doing what she can do best, rolling and rolling fast. The timetable speed limit here is 60 miles per hour, but we verified her speed at over 75. But remember, Mr. Claytor's at the throttle. Who's going to tell the boss to slow down? After cutting away from her train, the 611 arrived at the East Wayne Yard in Fort Wayne just before sundown. She had demonstrated her abilities in a show of speed and power that many other locomotives would be hard-pressed to duplicate. This modern, roller-bearing, fleet-footed 484 is a tribute to the Norfolk and Western Railway and the men of Roanoke who designed and built her. On the Norfolk and Western, there is no doubt. Of all the hundreds of locomotives on the roster, only this one can lay claim to the title of Queen of the Fleet. After a successful series of trips out of Chicago and St. Louis, the 611 headed back east. A layover was scheduled in Bellevue, Ohio on the return trip. Nickel Plate Burke 765 had just completed her season of excursions and was in Bellevue at this time. The 765 crew decided to steam up the Burke to welcome the 611. After the 611 had cut away from her train, her crew spotted her on the ready track west of the turntable. The 765 was turned to line the table for the ready track, and then she moved towards the 611. Coupled pilot to pilot, the two locomotives made a grand sight. At this moment, there was nowhere else in the world where two high-horsepower mainline steam locomotives could be found posed like this. Kodak stock probably climbed a point or two this afternoon. After the brief photo session, the engines had to be put away. First, the 765 was turned and backed into stall 14 in the roundhouse. Then the table was lined for the 611, and she was turned and backed onto the east turntable approach lead. Once spotted, the two locomotives were again photographed from all angles before the daylight was gone. Nickel Plate Road locomotive number 765 and Norfolk and Western Class J locomotive number 611, the two most active mainline steam engines in operation today. Perhaps they'll be together again someday.